Well, hello and welcome everyone to another vlog for Engage, where learning through play is the name of the game. Today, we're going to be laying all my cards out on the table out of frame. But today, we're going to be laying all of our cards here out on the table to explain exactly what's been going on with the channel as of late. Yeah, you can keep going. What? No cool graphic transition? No, sorry about that, Chief. We don't have the budget for that. Plus, you haven't even filmed your official Patreon announcement yet. My Patreon? You mean the one at patreon.com/engage show? Yeah, exactly. The one at patreon.com/engage show. People can go there right now to learn more about how they could support the show. Oh, well, that's great. Well, when are we going to film that official announcement to explain how the official Patreon for this channel is going to work? Right after we get done with this video, so let's go. Come on. Work with me here. Okay, I get it. And don't forget to thank people for subscribing to your channel and for even considering to support you on Patreon. Show your gratitude, man. Goofy little skits like that aside, I want to say, seriously, thank you. Thank you so much for watching the vlogs as of late. Thank you for watching the episodes of Engage that have been posted so far, and thank you so much for sharing these videos across your favorite social media platforms using the hashtags appearing now on screen, and thank you for even considering to support the future of the show at patreon.com/engage show. I know people say this an awful lot on YouTube, but I'm really grateful for your support. I genuinely mean it. I wish there was some better way that I could convey that other than just talking to the camera, as there's only so much you can do there, but really I'm grateful for your support, and it's what keeps me going, especially during this difficult time. So thank you so much for that. So let's get into it. Why has there been long gaps between the past few episodes of Engage, as I said earlier last year that I was working on reviving the show? Well, whoa, hang on a second there past me. I want to make sure that my fellow educators out there know that all the games that we've covered on Engage so far that are tabletop experiences are actually available to play in various digital media platforms. So in our probable distance learning situations that are going to come up this fall, and who knows beyond that, there are ways to leverage those games for the power of game-based learning in your distance learning situations. So just know, like for instance, Hanabi. Hanabi is available on boardgamearena.com. If you want to be playing Settlers of Catan, we got up here. Settlers of Catan and its expansions are playable at CatanUniverse.com, and there's also a Catan app. And then we have Pandemic, of course, has its own app. And as we talked about in that episode, there doesn't seem to be a co-op mode within the game itself, which blows my mind. I don't know how they could leave that out. I don't own the app, so I don't know for sure, but at least according to the research that I did, that's what people have said about it. But there are ways, of course, to finagle around that, given that it's a co-op game. And so, if you're playing the game and you're sharing your screen with your team, then it's not like you're trying to hide anything from each other. So there you go. I just wanted to make sure everybody knew that those tabletop experiences and others that we're going to be covering on the channel, that they do have options that are suitable also for facilitating through a distance learning situation, which, let's be real, is most likely going to happen this fall, and who knows after that. Back to you, me in the present. So let's get into it. Why has there been long gaps between the past few episodes of Engage, as I said earlier last year that I was working on reviving the show? Well, I found myself in a position for the second time, mind you, in which I was expected to teach across the board from pre-K to 8th grade while also managing a school's entire IT department at the same time. Not a combination I'd recommend by any means, mind you. While I do hold a master's degree in educational technology from the University of Connecticut, ed tech and IT are very much not the same thing. And before I get off on a full-on rant about that subject, I'm going to set that aside because that's not what we're here to talk about today. Today I want to talk about how I had the truly wonderful opportunity to join part of the founding faculty of a brand new progressive middle school in Agora Hills, California by the name of Catalyst. Well, good morning. It's April 20th, 2020, and I decided to take a trip today to the room where it used to happen. Over the course of the 2019-2020 school year, I had the opportunity to join forces with a great team of other educators who recognized the fact that the traditional industrial age model is just not serving the needs of our young men and women in the 21st century. And everybody and their mother throws around the term 21st century learning, but there are precious few schools that don't just talk the talk, but actually walk the walk and actually implement structural change in order to actually be able to facilitate what 21st century learning is supposed to be. And why is that? Why aren't people making the changes that need to be made to actually bring schools up to par with the current day? The truth is that in the United States anyway, our country has a truly unhealthy obsession with high-stakes standardized testing, which former Assistant Secretary of Education Diane Ravitch goes into detail in her book Reign of Error. And in her more recent book Slaying Goliath, she talks about how many educators and many people in the general public are realizing what's been going on with public schools in America, and they're taking a stand. They're not having it anymore, and that's what we need. Before the recent protests where people gathered together to stand against hate and racism, before all the rallies on climate change, before the Women's March, before March for Our Lives, before the March for Science, teachers all across the country in America were taking to the streets to take a stand and desperately cry out and say, look, enough is enough. We know this is not how education is supposed to work. Please listen to us. Because teachers have had enough of being forced to implement policies that we know are not effective and we know do not serve the needs well of our students, our parents, and our communities at large. Thankfully, but only recently, the tide has just started to change. It's started to move back in the right direction as colleges and universities like UCLA are deciding, you know what? We're not going to take the SAT into account in our admission process anymore because we don't find it useful. And we can only hope that this is just the beginning of a trend that will create a domino effect of going through college universities and going into high school and middle school and so forth, because we need this change to happen. We need to get our classrooms back, our schools back. We need to start listening to experts in the field and instituting policies that actually help the development of your child and your teen and actually serve their needs and not just focus all of this attention on standardized testing. Setting that soapbox aside for that very important discussion that really does need to happen with the general public participating, because, I mean, if you're a parent, I would hope you would want better for your child. You'd want a better school system, and to know that other countries don't operate their schools in this way. And we need to get back to being a leader in education in the United States and get rid of these policies that are just not helping. Getting back to Catalyst, I will tell you, of course, yes, it was a small little private school, and in the private school world, teachers are not chained to the outcomes of standardized tests, so they can focus completely on, teaching. Like, that's their job. It would be really wonderful if every teacher in every school could just, focus on teaching. I knew going in that jumping on the opportunity to become part of the founding faculty for a brand new little middle school would be taking a risk, but it was a risk that I was happy to take because I believe so strongly in preparing our young men and women for the fourth industrial revolution. Overall, Catalyst was a phenomenal experiment that I was so proud to be a part of, and it yielded fruitful results. But despite the progress we made with our academic program and our social emotional learning program, that in the eyes of any parent or any visitor who came during our student exhibitions, in which our students showed off not only what they learned but what they produced, in the eyes of all those people, it was a wonderful success. But our school was sadly forced to shut down after this first year due to a lack of funding support. So let's get down to brass tacks. What is it that educators actually need? What did I learn from my experience working at Catalyst and my previous teacher lives before that? For starters, time. Apart from having properly allocated funding to be able to support hiring educators in all the different subjects, to support proper classroom infrastructure and decent Wi-Fi and other classroom supplies, all that sort of thing. Educators need time. Teachers need time not only to plan out curricula, not only to locate or to personally develop resources for their students to be able to use to differentiate instruction and meet all their needs as much as humanly possible, not only to figure out meaningful ways to assess learning, but teachers also need time to find ways to stay ahead of the curve and figure out new approaches to learning and new ideas for a curricula, like what we showcase on this channel. Teachers also need time in order to learn how to use new tools that could help support the varied needs of their students. And oh yeah, teachers also need a great deal of time to get to know their students and learn about what their learning needs are in the first place, right? Teachers also need time in order to be able to cultivate strong relationships with parents, in order to form a team to be able to support the needs of your children and teens as much as humanly possible as a unified front. And the good news at Catalyst was that the leadership team was consisted entirely of educators with decades of experience between them, and they knew what it was like to be in the trenches and be a classroom teacher. And so they all knew all too well how time is one of a teacher's most precious resources. So what did the leadership team at Catalyst do to account for this serious need for time? Well, they took a look at our weekly schedule and they carved out a single day for us each and every week to meet with us for collaborative curriculum planning. And this was huge. At no other school that I'd ever served at before, whether I wore the humanities teacher hat or I wore the director of educational technology and innovation hat, had ever dedicated that specific time during the school day for teachers to be able to meet together and plan together. And having that opportunity to take one full day each and every week out of our schedule to meet together and to collaborate on developing curricula and classroom resources was tremendous. It left such an impact on our ability to be able to integrate learning across our different disciplines and subjects. And granted, yes, we were starting out this school because it was a brand new school. We had a very small student body. And so that certainly helped the logistics of that situation to be able to take that amount of time. And while students were participating in what many would call specialist classes or elective classes, that's when we would meet. But plenty of other schools, of course, they offer those specialist and elective classes. But a lot of times in other schools that I've worked for or the schools that I grew up in, those specialist classes and the elective classes would be slated for the end of the school day. Or you'd have faculty meetings at the very end of the school day. And by that point in time, most teachers are going to be fried, where you just went through the entire school day. You've had classes largely back to back. You might have gotten a lunch break, but you might not have had the chance to eat anything. So you're in a haze, right? But having the opportunity to meet together during the school day made such a tremendous impact on our ability to be able to develop new and unique approaches to learning together and to workshop our units and our projects to ensure that there were clear connections that could be made all across the board between all the different subjects and disciplines. It's exactly what I would tell any time that I've taught writing, is that it's so precious, it's so invaluable to be able to have somebody else's eyes and ears on your ideas, to be able to workshop them out with you, to bounce ideas back and forth, because there's only so much that you'll see yourself as the creator, as the writer of whatever it is you're working on. And you'll inevitably benefit from being able to gain a perspective from outside your own head, as long as you set up in place deliberately that feedback that you receive is constructive. So that was another huge piece at Catalyst, is we started right away from the get-go just talking about how do I provide meaningful and detailed constructive feedback to a classmate, and if somebody gives me constructive feedback, how do I take it? How do I receive it? What do I do to take action on it, or to at least give it some thought? And as a humanities teacher, I got to go visit art class with Augustine, and I got to see what the kids were doing and learning about contrast and perspective. And then I could go in when I was doing a humanities focused lesson and talk about, hey, when we're looking at The Wave by Todd Strasser, or we're looking at Hyperlight Drifter by Heart Machine. That's right, we looked at video games in my humanities classes quite often, and not just Minecraft, not just Fortnite, although those are huge juggernauts in the game-based learning space that we are going to cover on the show and probably come back to quite a lot because there's so much to cover there. And Look, subscribe to youtube.com/engageshow if you haven't already, and visit patreon.com/engageshow if you want to support that, so we can be a part of that. So then I had the opportunity to be able to say, hey guys, remember when you were just discussing composition and contrast with Augustine in art class? Well, let's take a look at the opening cinematic from Hyperlight Drifter. How did the game designers and the artists from Heart Machine leverage composition in order to introduce their protagonist to the player and inform the player about all they need to know about the conflict and the emotional struggle that the protagonist is dealing with without uttering a single word, without putting in a single line of text dialogue in the entire game? How did they do that? How did these storytelling techniques and these artistic techniques come together to make such a powerful story? And I'm going to have to stop myself right there and hit the pause button on that as well, because we're going to feature Hyperlight Drifter on Engage soon in the future. I'm telling you guys, there are so many new amazing episodes of Engage that I cannot wait to bring to you with your support, and I greatly appreciate whatever support you are willing to lend me. I have to ask any educator watching this vlog right now, when was the last time that you got to sit in on a colleague's class? When was the last time you got to visit a colleague's class that was not the same subject or discipline that you personally specialize in? When was the last time you got to work together and bring your classes together in the same class period, or however logistics shake out in your school? When was the last time you were able to do that? That's what I'm talking about. That's when we're talking about in terms of taking a good hard look at how schools function and talking about structural change that needs to happen in order to allow for those possibilities to be facilitated, right? And it can be possible. It can be possible if schools are given the resources they need and given the space they need and given, the amount of educators that a school actually physically needs to have class sizes that are reasonable, so planning these kind of projects are even conceivably possible, right? This is what we're talking about. Once upon a time in one of my past teacher lives, I got to be a teacher at this incredible school in West Hartford, Connecticut called Ben Brown's Academy, which was specifically designed for students with learning disabilities. And their approach to helping students with learning disabilities was first to get them to accept the fact that they had a learning disability, whether it's dyslexia, dysgraphia, CAPD, whatever it is, then to understand that you can leverage certain aspects of what the world perceives to be a learning disability to be your strength. And at the same time, you do have some kind of inherent strengths that you can work with, and you need to be able to be aware of those and identify those and sharpen those, continue to build upon them, and then identify those areas for improvement and really pinpoint specifically what you can do to address those, and start to develop strategies so that you can become active and independent and self-sufficient, right? And an active citizen of your community and an active learner, and that you can get your own resources and that you can walk on your own 2 feet. And then the school's mission at that point would be to send you on your merry way and bring you back to the school experience that you used to be a part of, whether it was a public school, private school, charter school, whatever it is. Their intent was not to keep you there forever, right? Their intent was to bring you there to help you get back on your feet academically and in some sense also sometimes socially and pragmatically if you needed that. And away you go. A critical part of that school experience was that the Ben Brown's Academy culture had this thing they called the feedback awareness key, which nowadays makes me think quite a lot about gamification. But the thing is, they just didn't have just straight up points. They had specific points targeting specific positive learning behaviors and specific negative learning behaviors. And as teachers, as mediators, it was up to us to keep track live in the classroom on the whiteboard of being able to point out to students anytime they exhibited a particular positive or negative learning behavior so they could be aware of both. You would earn a point maybe for being mindful. Hey, you used a resource. You looked that up on your own without me having to tell you or another student having to really gently prod you with a stick. Congratulations, you earned a mindful. That's terrific. Or, oh, you're putting yourself down for really no reason at all, or you're being really sarcastic with yourself or another student. You've earned an S with a slash through it. That's sarcasm or self-put down. We don't go for that here, and neither should you. So students would earn points based upon those learning behaviors, right? And one of the best things that we would point out to students all the time. I mean, really, it was all great. But there are points attributed to what the school called bridges and transfers. And bridges, it would be to recognize when a student made a personal connection to something that was being talked about and discussed and studied in whatever class it was. And a transfer was when they brought in something from one class, whatever they learned from that one class, a strategy, a skill, and they brought it along with them to another class. And as I said before, this was a system that was specifically designed to help students with learning disabilities become more self-aware, to build that metacognition, to become more self-aware of the great things they were doing and the things they weren't doing so well in. But really, this was a system that could be used for any sort of students in a mainstream, so to speak, or a normal classroom, whatever the heck normal is. But what that school identified as a transfer piece of feedback is so critical. It's what any teacher in any school wants any student to do all the time. But the point of what we did at Catalyst is recognize that our disciplines do not function in silos. They're not separated, okay? I don't just walk into this room and think, now I'm in math class. I am going to think only about math. And now I'm in science. And I'm going to think only about science. That's not how the world works. Everybody knows how that's not how the world works. And yet we continue to operate, for the most part, with schools that separate these subjects out. And look, don't get me wrong, there is certainly value in taking the time here and there to hit the pause button to focus in on developing certain skills over the course of time. Obviously. The point I'm trying to make here, though, is the culture of your school environment, the culture of your learning environment absolutely has an impact on the ability that your teachers have to be able to come together, collaborate, integrate disciplines together in a natural and organic way, to be able to model that behavior for your students so they get to participate in real interdisciplinary learning experiences. Because Catalyst was just starting out, and because therefore we were such a small community, we were like a throwback to the classic storybook image of your one-room schoolhouse from Once Upon a Time in American history. Augustine, Rebecca, and I would take turns steering the ship throughout the day, and apart from the times when one of us would need to leave the room in order to focus on prepping the next unit or project that we had on the horizon, we would all get to be physically present in the same learning space, which meant that we all got to be directly tuned in to everything that was going on in each one of our sessions, which meant that we were able to establish a thread of consistency throughout and be able to reinforce whatever learning strategies each one of us were helping our students work through. For example, in a humanities-focused session, I would often work with the Catalyst crew on what I called the rope strategy, which was a mnemonic that I cooked up a while back in a previous teacher life to help students remember what strategies they needed to use in order to craft a basic thesis or an argument in writing. That's an example of something that we worked on all year long, but it didn't just happen when I was steering the ship for a humanities-focused lesson. We worked on developing those communication literacy skills as a team all across the board. For example, I vividly remember that when Rebecca led a science-focused session in which she was guiding the Catalyst crew through the process of developing their own physics-based experiments based upon the incredible work by the band OK Go and their wonderful music videos. Which, by the way, if you're not familiar with the band OK Go's incredible educational resources, check out the link in the description below. And Rebecca would take every opportunity, to be able to say to the kids, hey, remember when you guys were just talking about moments ago with Jeremy, and yes, by the way, we went by first names, which I personally loved. Remember when you guys were talking with Jeremy about using evidence to back up your conclusions? Isn't that what you were talking about, Jeremy? And I'd be in the back of the room like the Kool-Aid man, be like, oh yeah, we were just talking about that. She would make that connection between humanities and science, whether you're writing a basic thesis or an argument, analyzing a piece of literature or interactive literature in the case of Hyperlight Drifter, or whether you're conducting a science experiment. You've come to a conclusion and you gotta base that conclusion off of your data. Well, what's that? It's using evidence to support your conclusion, right? It's the same thing, but making that connection concrete, pointing it out there every opportunity you get, really blatantly was like, that just reinforces the connections between the different disciplines, okay? We're not living in a world where things are isolated and I have my blinders on. Now I'm doing this and my tunnel vision is over here doing that. That's not how the world works, okay? That's what we're talking about. I mean, come on. I have to ask my fellow educators out there, when was the last time that any of you got to do something like that? I mean, I'm sure the answer is probably never. And to be real, that's most likely because if you're in a larger school, which I'm sure you are, the larger your school is, the larger your student body is. And the larger your student body is that your school community serves, in all likelihood, the more cramped your schedule is as an educator, because you're probably having to deal with back-to-back classes, which leaves you with no time to be able to collaborate with your colleagues throughout the day, or even just be able to walk the 3 feet across the hallway to be able to knock on the door and just visit their class for a little while, because the demands on your time and energy are just too great. And yeah, what are you supposed to do, right? And of course, if your school lacks the funding and the resources to be able to hire the right amount of educators to maintain a reasonable student-to-teacher class size ratio, well, obviously you can't do things like that because the demands on your time and energy are just too high. It, again, depends on the culture and the resources your schools have available to you to even allow your teachers to do such a thing, to even work together and bring what you're learning in this class and that class together so you can see the connections as a student, as a kid, as a teen. You know, that's what we need, people. So that was really a fantastic thing that we were able to make happen at Catalyst, and I would argue should be happening in schools everywhere. I mean, there are some countries that actually take this kind of approach where they just say, you know what, no, we don't teach things as subjects anymore. That's not a thing. We know that learning blends all together. We know that you make connections across disciplines, or what people think of as subjects and disciplines. We're not going to treat these things as separate anymore. We're going to see right from the get-go how things are interconnected, how they relate, how they depend on one another, how everything is a system, just like games, like we cover on this channel. And that's what it is, you know, and the United States needs to catch up with these things. By far, the coolest aspect of what we were able to offer in our program at Catalyst was what we called enterprise time. We took the idea that a lot of schools, a lot of innovative educators out there have done with what they call Genius Hour. But the thing about Genius Hour is that it's generally slated as an after-school activity, right? It's just maybe like once a week that innovative educator who's giving their time generously meets with whatever students who are interested, gathering together to say, look, if you have an amazing passion project that you want to see to fruition, we're going to go through a deliberate design process and learn how to transform your idea into a tangible product. But we're going to work on this after school though, so it's an extracurricular activity. An extracurricular literally meaning outside of what you normally do in this school culture that you've created, right? And it's just so much of a need today in the 21st century that we made it an integral part of our curriculum. It's not an extracurricular thing, it's in the curriculum. It's enterprise time. We did it once a week during the school day as a class session where we hit pause on everything else. We all gathered together and looked at how do we work through a deliberate design process from A to B, ideation all the way to prototyping and all the rest of it, going through that deliberate design process, starting with empathy, of course, working towards developing a tangible product that would be an answer to the question, how will I affect the world in a meaningful and impactful way? And thing is, we set out with the idea that, look, you may not finish, you may not get to the end of this complicated design process in a week. You may not get to the end of this complicated design process in one school year. We were hoping, of course, to carry this out through maybe the entirety of middle school, and it would depend on whatever the student or students who banded together, whatever they decided to do for their project, however time it might actually take. But the point is, like, look, we're not expecting you to just blitz through this. We're working through a deliberate design process here to take your time to figure these things out. And it gave students the space to iterate and experiment and learn from failure, as we talk about when learning, game-based learning. That's such a critical part of game-based learning. It's also such a critical part of just learning in general. And it was so important for some students to be able to take the time to work through several different ideas of what they could do for their enterprise time project, many of which were completely different from one another. It could have been, I want to go ahead and design a game that calls attention to cyberbullying or climate change, and then actually, you know what, no, I want to go and make a documentary instead. Actually, no, you know what, it's not working out for me. I want to do a clothing line that will be a nonprofit that will raise money for the homeless or something like that. And these ideas would shift over time for a few students. And other students, they did stick with the same idea and they worked all the way forward. Two of our students worked on a manga, and if they're watching, I hope they're continuing to work on this manga. They wanted to develop a manga together to inspire other kids their age, just to show them that, hey, you know, even at middle school age, you totally can publish a manga as well and learn the complex process each step of the way behind the scenes of how this thing comes about. This was so incredible. Unfortunately, of course, since Catalyst had to shutter its doors at the end of this year due to a lack of funding support, we were not able to carry the project all the way through to be able to see if you know, what would come about of each student's enterprise time throughout maybe the course of 3 years, if they would do one project each year, or if they worked on one project starting in 6th grade, and then eventually by the time they got to 8th grade, that it would blossom into something even just completely mind-blowing, as I'm sure it would have. Unfortunately, we're not going to get to see that, but still, it was such an incredible thing that we did in our school, and I would argue really should be a thing that happens in every school. True 21st century learning entails developing a school culture that makes it possible for helping students to learn how to take advantage of all the different resources out there available to them in the midst of this fourth industrial revolution, in order to become not just passive consumers of knowledge, cramming their heads with facts for the sake of somebody's test, but for synthesizing all these different resources together, for evaluating the quality of these different resources for validity and reliability. And we want to develop a culture in which students become innovative producers of new ideas, new products that society needs in order to continue functioning in our changing world with all kinds of new demands all the time, that we're just, you know, all the time, even in the midst of just this pandemic, seeing problems that need to be solved that just were not dealt with before, or at least not dealt with in the same way historically, and improving upon that, making things more equitable, right? There's a lot of schools talk about promoting design thinking, talk about promoting maker education, talk about promoting STEAM and STEM, but so many of those projects are driven by what the standards are making teachers cover, right? We got to get through this material, we got to get through this pre-made STEAM project that addresses these certain standards. It's just never time in the school day, when you think about it, to actually do something that's driven by the students. Is that So when I talk about how I'm a champion of student-driven learning, it literally means student-driven learning, okay? And inquiry-based learning. I'm not just throwing around these terms because they just sound so cool. We were also, in addition to having enterprise time be a critical part of our weekly routine, we had advisory as part of our weekly routine. And we would meet together, and students would have the platform and opportunity to raise what could be sensitive issues that they wanted to discuss, and thinking about, well, collectively, what could we do, you know, to address these issues? Just like in enterprise time, just like everything, we always address, you know, identify the problem, what can we do about it, what's a tangible way to move forward, and let's do the best we can, right? Advisory was also just such a critical part for everybody, teachers included, to set academic goals for the week, set social goals for the week, set personal goals for the week. This would be something that, you know, as teachers, of course, you know, sure, we're adults, but we work on these things too, and we needed to make that clear and model these behaviors. If we want our students to do these things, we have to do these things too, right? And then think about tangible ways that we can measure our progress for each of these goals as best as we could, and think about, what did we accomplish throughout last week? And sometimes advisory was just an opportunity to all come together and just go out for a hike, as we were able to on our campus, to be able to go outside and go to some trails that happen to be nearby, maybe just take a good long walk, bring some water along, some sunscreen, Just get outside, work on a short piece of poetry or art or something, set more of a tone of intentionality for the week. And again, I'm sure any educator watching this video right now would love to do that kind of thing with their students, to take the time to step outside the four walls of your classroom and do something like that together as a community building exercise. But again, it all comes down to time. It all comes down to time, right? And if teachers are not given the time to do these things, then they can't do them. Having that advisory period to be able to come together all together at the same time to do these different activities, to build community and to build morale and to build goal setting practices, these were all super critical for fostering our students' social emotional learning and their academic and social learning. And we greatly missed having that opportunity to come together as a community each and every week, because when the pandemic arrived and we all had to go into quarantine, let me tell you, I mean, it was already tragic enough when we had to break the news to our Catalyst crew that the school was not going to be able to continue next year. And then shortly after that, we had to go into quarantine and shift into an online learning model. And absolutely not the way that anybody would have dreamed of trying to bring the school year to a close. But as tough as that was, our students came together virtually over Zoom, of course, and through Seesaw, and we worked on some incredible projects. Our students made some really phenomenal things come together. It really was just fantastic in spite of, missing that critical piece of actually being physically in person together as a community. In art, Augustine guided the students through a process of making a wonderful exhibit through Art Steps, where our students not only created digital works of art and music speaking to what it's like to live in a time of crisis and then looking to the future to hopefully a more hopeful time, but they also got to participate in experience design, actually designing that virtual space with intention for how they wanted people to experience those works of art and music, just like the whole field of experience design that's behind what happens when you go into a museum and how you experience that exhibit. And Rebecca did a phenomenal job of guiding our Catalyst crew through the experience of the cardboard boat challenge, where you would create a boat out of cardboard and pop it into a bathtub. It was supposed to be a swimming pool. We were hoping to do this in person and actually get in the cardboard boats, but due to the pandemic and due to not everybody having swimming pools available, you could design a cardboard boat that you could at least put some billiard balls or whatever into, or some kind of weight to see, like, would this thing sink or float, right? And they made some incredible things there. And they designed experiments that would demonstrate the relationship between potential energy and kinetic energy. And then for me, I guided our Catalyst crew through the experience of something that was inspired by a local film and animation competition that I used to coach students to compete in another school, that was called Making Movies That Matter, in which students would create a short, no more than 3-minute film or animation that would be like a fictional short or documentary or a PSA that would not only call attention to a social action issue that the student cared very much about, but then ended with some sort of tangible call to action. What should the people do after watching your video to get up off their seat and actually do something about the issue, right? Give them something tangible that they can do, and not just, go to this website and throw money at something, but something that you can actually do tangibly to make, maybe, or somebody to call, some letters to write, whatever it is, right? That's what we got to do. Best of all, we got to stick to our central tenet of providing an authentic audience to come to see what our students had worked so hard on. In the wintertime, we had an exhibition. We invited people from the local community to see everything that our students produced, not just learned about, but made and produced. And through Zoom, we were able to make that happen virtually once we were all in quarantine, to see that Art Steps exhibit and to see the Making Movies That Matter and to see videos of the Cardboard Boat Challenge and the experiments about kinetic energy and potential energy. And the people that would come in, there were not just the parents of the kids who attended our school, but people from the community at large. And let me tell you, even in those Zoom experiences, you might think me biased in saying this and talking about how proud I am of my own students, but for all the people who attended, I wish you could have been there to see that there was not a dry eye in the house when going through those art exhibits and seeing all those other projects I talked about. So all in all, I'm deeply grateful for the opportunity and for that I took the risk to join the Catalyst crew and have this experience of being part of the founding faculty of a brand new progressive middle school. It was something for sure I'll never forget. Sure, it wasn't a perfect teaching experience. I mean, nothing is, but it really came the closest that I've ever experienced to actually working in a school that really wasn't kidding around about addressing 21st century learning in the truest sense of doing what is really necessary to prepare our young men and women for this fourth industrial revolution that we're living through right now. And as I'm sure you can imagine, having to endure the experience, the sad experience of the school having to shutter its doors due to a lack of funding, and then be quarantined by yourself on top of it in the midst of a pandemic, and it seemingly having to be in quarantine forever now due to the way that the United States is responding to the pandemic lately, is not, you can imagine how tough it's been for me to wrestle with the question of where do I go from here. All that I know for certain right now is, number one, the batteries in the lights that I have while I'm recording these videos are going to continue to die out, as well as the memory card in my camera over there. It's going to run out of space as I'm trying to cram everything that I wanted to say into this vlog, and there's been quite a lot. Thank you for sticking with me. No, but seriously, all that I know for certain is that I'm going to be working as hard as I possibly can to make new content for Engage, because I'm trying to look at this all as an opportunity during quarantine, during this crazy pandemic, to get back into making this show everything that I know that it really can be, as it is a dream of mine to make a show, as I've talked about in previous vlogs. And obviously now more than ever, my fellow educators out there need support and need resources to show them how they could use games and other apps and web-based tools, of course, too, to foster learning through play, as play is going to be so important, especially if everybody has to be in an online learning model and practice social distancing throughout the next school year. If we can't all be together, how can we all make that work? The need for that could not be greater, and the need for me to be creative and to make this show could not be greater. And, I want to pursue that initial dream I've had this whole time as hard as I possibly can, because, well, there's no time like the present. Let's make it happen. And ideally, I want to get back to how Engage began, which was also to strive for the goal of boosting the signal for other like-minded educators out there who are pushing the envelope and doing truly incredible things with game-based learning, and to promote the work also of game designers, like they used to do at the Institute of Play and Quest to Learn, and like we used to do at Game Desk and Playmaker, the game designers who would collaborate closely with educators to make those impressive and irreplaceable game-based learning experiences happen. I want to showcase these people, boost the signal, spread the word about all the hard work that they're doing, because I talk to educators all the time out there who, because again, they're pressed for time, right? They don't have all the time in the world to spend to do all the research themselves to find every cool thing that's out there. So I want to be that resource that educators turn to, and with your support, by subscribing to this channel, by considering to support the show on Patreon at patreon.com/engageshow, if I have your support, I can take this show to new heights. I can focus on making it even to the point of hopefully maybe even being a full-time experience. That would be the dream, really, ultimately, but baby steps along the way. So the more that I have your support and being able to do that, the better. And just, I'm looking to make that a cycle of support where, as I said, if I have your support in making the show, I can provide more resources and more interesting things for educators to consult to help them work the magic that they work, So again, thanks so much for watching. The next video that's going to hit the channel is going to be the official announcement for the Patreon at patreon.com/engageshow, explaining how all of that works and how you can support the show, especially for those of you who are not already familiar with how Patreon works. And there's been some changes to how Patreon works, and I'm going to explain the approach that I'm taking with it, so it'll be crystal clear about what it is that I'm doing with that. And then after that, we'll finally get back to making full, proper episodes of Engage, where learning through play is the name of the game. And I'm so excited to show you what's coming next. As you all know from watching the pandemic episode, I've got a whole book full of other ideas, and I keep adding to it like every single day. So much more to come. Get psyched.